When you first receive reviewer comments, it's natural that you will feel a little bit overwhelmed. You feel like, oh, all of these changes I have to make, and you just feel depressed. You don't want to do anything. That's normal. The key point is start with the small changes first. Don't start the biggest thing. Start with the smallest, easiest change so you can get your momentum going. And just do a little bit every day in the beginning. Don't keep waiting for some big block of time, some entire day in the future. Just start 15 minutes a day. Small little block of time, doing short little revisions. Start with the easy things, and then you'll start to feel, oh, this isn't so bad. I'm making progress. I can check these off. One thing I like to do when we first get the comments from the journal, I like to take every comment from the journal reviewer and put them in an Excel sheet. Reviewer 1, all his comments. Reviewer 2, all his comments. And then I will see whether some of them say the same thing. Then we definitely need to do that. Sometimes they say different things. Sometimes they conflict with each other. Reviewer A asks me to shorten a section. Reviewer B asks me to lengthen it. And I have to treat those conflicting comments in a very special way by telling both reviewers that you disagree with each other. So I can't make both of you happy, so I've chosen reviewer A or reviewer 1 instead of reviewer 2, for example. And then usually the second reviewer will forgive me for not following his instructions because he knows it's impossible for me to make both reviewers happy. But we do need to let them know about any conflicts. Another reason I want to put them all in an Excel file is that I can make sure that I answer each one. And whenever I make a correction, I can check it and then make comments about it in the Excel file. I will use those comments in my response letter when I write it to the reviewers. But I need to record it at the time that I'm making the change. Otherwise, it will be more difficult for me when I'm writing my actual response letter. Now, I'm going to go through some of the common corrections that reviewers will ask us to make, the common changes they will ask us to make. The first common correction reviewers ask us to make is to revise citations. Many reviewer reports ask for this. They ask usually for more references. Reviewers have read a lot. Between reviewers, they've probably read more than you have, and this is one great reason to have a peer review. They might identify important papers that you did not read, and they might alert you to them, and then you can correctly cite them as you should. Other times, this can be less helpful. I have seen some reviewer reports for students in my class where the reviewers treat it like a kind of memory game, and they try to think about every paper that I can think of that's even slightly related to your topic. And many times these papers are not necessary to cite. They're far off, in some cases, from what our topic is, and they don't necessarily add anything to our literature review. In fact, sometimes they expand the literature review far longer than we need. So in situations like this, one mistake that students make is over-revision. I see students sometimes add paragraphs of additional explaining information about literature that's not necessary. Rather than add a whole sentence or two for each reference, sometimes we can just add one sentence for several references. You can say, Smith, Thompson, and Johnson also discussed this, and then just give the papers there. The reviewer is happy because the references are there, but you won't go well beyond your word count. Now, the exception to this, there are two exceptions. Sometimes the reviewer will say, wow, your paper looks exactly like another paper that I saw before. Okay, now you should be worried and read the whole paper very, very carefully because if it's conflicting with yours, then you should be aware of it. Another type of reference is sometimes the reviewers will say, wow, I think somebody already did your study before. Also, you should be concerned and read that carefully. So if the reviewer mentions a paper that's exactly the same or totally opposite, read carefully and perhaps add more information to your paper to respond to that. But if it's only related, here's my advice. Don't even read the whole paper. Just read the abstract first. And it's possible that you can add a quick one-sentence reference based on the abstract of that paper. it makes me concerned sometimes when students will take months to respond to a reviewer letter because they're writing so much extra in their literature review about each reference, and it's not really that important for their paper. Instead, if they just read the abstract and added a single sentence for each reference, they could quickly get this revision completed in their paper. The second revision that reviewers often ask for is revising terms and definitions. Maybe you use a keyword in your paper to mean something, but your reviewer has another idea about what the keyword means, or he doesn't like how you defined one of your keywords. How can you handle this situation? Well, you can either change it to match what the reviewer wants, or you can argue with him. Now, arguing with reviewers about terms is mafan. It's a lot of trouble because you say, I think it means this. He says, no, I think it means this. I think it means this. The only way to defend your key term is to find another previous paper who used your term in the same way that you used it. And then you can cite that previous paper and say, I am using the term as defined by, give the reference. In fact, when you first write your paper, I think this is a good reference. You find at least just one previous reference who used the key term in the way that you are using it, and then you will protect yourself from reviewer comments criticizing the definition or the use of key terms in your paper. Another common type of revision that reviewers will ask for is sometimes to shorten the paper. Actually, this is usually an editor comment, and you will notice when you revise your paper that this is a very common conflict between editors and reviewers. Editors always want you to shorten your paper because long papers are expensive to publish and they have limited space. And reviewers are always asking you to do dirty work that makes your paper longer and longer. So you have this conflict between the editor's requirements for word count and the reviewer's work, which will push your word count higher. And your job as the author is to balance this. This is a problem. It is a challenge, but it's your challenge. You have to solve it. Now, editors will sometimes say, cut 10% of your paper. I saw one editor comment said, cut 30% of your paper. Ouch. That's painful. But what do we do? Where do we cut? If you have to cut 30% of your paper, don't cut from the end of your paper. Don't cut from your discussion and your results. That's where your impact is. That's where your value is. Cut from the beginning. Cut from the literature review. Cut from other people's research, not from your own research. The first thing that I would cut is cut unnecessary words. Now, I have other videos about redundant words, extra words. You can watch those. You'll see dozens of examples of phrases we can delete and replace with a single word. That's a great place to start. Number two, cut long quotations. Now, quotation means we are quoting with quotation marks from another paper. These are somebody's exact words, and usually quotations take a lot of space. And because they take a lot of space, they expand the word count. If you cut out the quotation, you can replace it with a very short citation. Now, citation is your own way of presenting the research from another paper. You can be shorter than the other guy. You can say it in a shorter amount of words. So cut out the long quote, replace with a short cite. You can still get the same contribution from the paper, but you can save space. Footnotes are another place to cut. Sometimes footnotes are very long and detailed, and people don't read them, or they're not critical to the paper, and if they're removed, they save a lot of space. Long summaries of other research, literature review. There are times when I go through my students' papers and I remove paragraphs, literally paragraphs of literature review. Why? The student has written a dissertation, and in a dissertation, you have to cite a lot of literature. You have to impress your professor with all of the dirty work that you did. You have to show your professor the history of the world. But when you write for journal publication, your contribution is not in all of your reading, but rather in your results. So you want to minimize the number of references to only those that are necessary to understand your work. So sometimes when you change from a dissertation or a thesis into a paper, The number one problem is the literature review is too big. You need to go back and cut out all of those related papers. I mean, there's a lot of related papers there, but that's not important. What's important are the critical papers, the essential papers to understanding your contribution. I'll do another video about that in the future. Additional cases. Let's say that you have several case studies that you're looking at. One solution might be, rather than do 3 case studies, you just cut one of the case studies out and leave the remaining 2, and now you're within the word limit of the journal. One other possibility, if your paper is very, very long, you might divide it into 2 articles. Put 2 case studies in one and the other case study in a third, or divide your results into 2 unique contributions and write 2 different papers. That's another thing that could work in extreme cases where you're way over the word limit of the journal. Now, another comment is revising to lengthen. Now, this happens usually when reviewers ask you to add a lot of extra data into your paper, and that extra data expands your word limit beyond what the journal allows. Maybe the journal has a 3,000 word limit and the reviewer asks for an additional 1,000 words. Now you have to find a way to integrate all of this extra words and still be at 3,000 words. It's a hard job. Here are some recommendations. First, you can ask the editor, Reviewer 1 is asking me to add a lot of data that will expand my journal article beyond the word limit. Can you please break your rule for me and let me publish my longer paper? The editor may agree, but he may not agree. It's really up to him, but you can ask. Second thing, you can tell the reviewer, what you've asked, I just don't have the space for it. The journal word limit is much less than the work that you have given me, and he may say, okay, I understand the scope of your article is smaller and you don't have the space, therefore you don't have to do it. I've seen that happen as well, but he may still insist on it, in which case it's going to get painful because you will probably have to cut other parts of your article to make room for the new material that your reviewer is asking you to put in. And there have been times when I work with students in my writing lab and we have to dramatically cut our introduction, our methods, other parts of our paper to make room for additional results and data that the reviewer wanted to put in. Personally, I felt that the paper was weaker as a result, but the reviewer wanted it and we're going to do it. So this is just one of those painful things that we sometimes have to do when we write research papers. Another common revision that reviewers will ask us to do is to revise theory and method. Fortunately, this isn't very common. In my opinion, if the reviewer wants you to write a new paper with a new theory and a new method, you should probably choose another journal, because new theory and new method is a new paper. That's a lot of work, and I don't want you to give up on this paper until you've been rejected at least 2 or 3 times. So in this extreme case, when the reviewer wants new theory, new method, you basically already have the results with the old theory and the old method. Try another journal first, or try to convince the reviewer to accept your current theory and method first before you do the whole study again using a different theory and a different method. Do you have to do everything the reviewers ask? No, but you can never ignore a reviewer comment. That's the important thing. You can argue, but you can't ignore. If you ignore a reviewer comment, even the editor may reject you during the review process because he doesn't think you are taking the comments seriously. He may believe you're wasting everyone's time. So argue is okay, ignoring, not okay. Always answer. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about some polite ways that we can answer the reviewers. I'm going to talk about some polite ways in which we can disagree with reviewers. I'll give you some situations and show you some example sentences where we are arguing with our reviewers as politely as we can. Remember, When you fight reviewers, reviewers always win. So we don't want to fight with our reviewers. We want to get them on our side. We want to persuade them about that we are doing everything we can. We want to show we are a hardworking, open-minded scholar who's willing to make changes and who's very reasonable. So in the first example here, the reviewer's arguing with our use of dates. Now, I'm going to give you several examples in my next slides about arguments with reviewers, but I don't want you to believe we always argue with reviewers. Usually we do whatever the reviewer says, but when we do argue, as these examples show, we try to be polite, diplomatic. Dates. Reviewer 1 has disputed my dating of this. I stand by my dating, which means I don't change my mind. But I have added a footnote explaining how I arrived at the dates, and I have provided some additional sources. Now here we are saying, look, I don't agree with you on this, and here is my additional evidence for that. So in this sentence, even though we didn't do what the reviewer wanted, we gave him something else, and that's a good principle to keep in mind. If you can't do what the reviewer wants, give him something else, so at least he feels that he's having a good contribution to your paper. You see, reviewers don't review papers just to make your life hard. That's not their goal. They review papers because they want to make their domain better. They want to make a contribution back to their domain. So if you fight them and make them feel that they are hurting your paper, they will not be happy. So if you do argue with them, show them that they did have a positive contribution to your paper, but maybe not the same contribution that they originally asked for. And by doing that, hopefully your reviewer will feel better about accepting your paper even though you didn't do everything that he wanted. Here's another example. Reviewer 2 disagrees with my list of causes for this. Although I think my list is correct, there is a debate in the literature on the causes, so I have added a reference to that debate in the text. Again, here, what did we do? We didn't change our causes, but we cited another article, a review article in this case, that gave both sides of this debate. If I had tried to give both sides of this debate in the paper, it would have taken a lot of space that I didn't have. By citing a review article, I made the reviewer happy and saved a lot of space. And here's another way, again, that we can use review articles to narrow down the knowledge gap that we don't want to cover in our own paper. Here's another example. Argument. Reviewer 1 seems to have misread the premise of my article, which was this. I thought it was clear, but I have taken the opportunity to clarify this point. No need to argue here. We can just politely show again what we intended to do. We don't have to be insulting, just as polite as we can. Data. Although the comments of reviewer 1 on the relevance of this relevance of my argument about this was interesting, I could not add material on that topic because I must adhere to the word limit. Now here's a situation where we use the journal word limit as a reason not to make a revision, and sometimes extra data can be far more than we can add and still meet the editor's word limit, and we can tell the reviewer, look, I thought it would be great to do that too, but I just don't have the space. The evil editor, the evil journal, the word limit doesn't allow me to do that. Sometimes the reviewer will understand this and will forgive you for not making these changes. Notice the word adhere to. That's a good word. Adhere to means to follow the rule. I am following the rule about the word limit. Here's another example. Data. I thought the second reviewer's comment regarding the relevance of this was brilliant. It was a great, smart idea. But after several attempts, I tried. I could not integrate it into the text in a brief enough space. Instead, I have inserted a general note. Notice what we're doing here. We are showing the reviewer we tried. We worked hard. We thought it was a good idea too. But after we tried, we realized we couldn't do it. So we gave him something else, a general note. Rather than just saying, no, I don't want to do it. Try to show you were willing to do it, even that you tried to do it before you start to argue with it. And again, that will give a better impression to your reviewer. cases. Because the reviewers were in conflict on the treatment of the second case, one recommended that I say more about it and one recommended that I cut it, I have chosen to follow the second reviewer and cut that section. Now, this is a situation where the reviewers disagreed with each other. And we identified this disagreement and we write this comment to both reviewers and say, look, you are not fighting me, you are fighting each other. I had to make a decision and I chose reviewer 2 rather than reviewer 1. And hopefully reviewer 1 will understand that you couldn't make them both happy and will forgive you. He usually will when he understands this conflict. Here's another example. Title. I did not modify the title as one reviewer recommended because I think it better suggests the argument, but I have added more specific keywords so that it will more accurately show up on online searches. Now, in this situation, the reviewer wanted us to change the title. We didn't want to change the title. We thought our title was good, but we wanted to give the reviewer something else that helped to address his concern. His concern was that we wouldn't be found on the search engine. So we put new keywords in the keywords section and we told him about that solution and he accepted that. Citation. The second reviewer recommended that I address this, but there wasn't enough space for it, so I have added an endnote referencing that reading. Here again, we're using the space limitation as a reason not to make a revision that the reviewer has asked for. Term. One reviewer thought my use of the word "this" was unusual, but I have found it used in this way more than a dozen times in academic texts in the field, so I have chosen to keep it. I can provide you with those citations if you wish. Here we have a key term, and we talked about key terms before. It's very hard to defend your key term unless you can find a previous paper that used the key term in the same way, and that's what we do here. We use a previous paper or previous papers to defend our use of this key term so the reviewer can see that our usage is standard, is normal, is acceptable. Now, I always like to add this last reference, this last comment to every letter we send to reviewers. When the reviewers finish reading my paper, I want them to feel that I tried hard to satisfy their concerns. I want the reviewer to see that I'm a hard-working scholar. I don't want them to think that I am avoiding and fighting my responsibilities to correct my paper. In fact, I want them to think that not only did I do what they asked, but I even did more than they asked. I went further than was necessary, further than that was required. And I believe my paper is improved because of it. So we will add this last comment. Once I started revising in response to the peer reviewers' helpful comments, I saw some other problems. And I revised several sections so that they are tighter and more to the point. I also changed my text in the second section from this to this since it supports my point better. So we're saying, look, we even made more changes than you asked us to do because we saw that we needed to based on your helpful comments. Again, we're showing that we are hardworking and we're doing as much as we can to improve our paper. When you send your paper to the editor, your letter back to the editor for the reviewers, separate your cover letter to the editor from your letters to the reviewers, reviewer 1 and reviewer 2, because the editor doesn't want your name to be on the letter to the reviewers. So make sure that that's a separate document and does not have your name anywhere on the paper. For more information about how Taiwanese scholars can publish in international journals, visit my blog, editing.tw/blog. I have articles and videos about how Taiwanese scholars can publish more effectively in international journals. I also have editing and translation service for Taiwanese scholars who are preparing manuscripts to publish. And you can visit our site, editing.tw, to find out more about that. Thank you for joining us.